This is exercise 38, deals with the digestive system. So we're going to just kind of briefly go over the anatomy of it. So the digestive system, also known as the gastrointestinal tract or alimentary canal. This is showing the major features of it, starting at the mouth with the oral cavity, which contains the tongue in it. What is boxed in red are the major organs for the digestive system. The other components are either subgroups of it or accessory structures. So if we start out once again at the mouth, the oral cavity, the food's going to go in the mouth. The tongue's going to help break it up. The salivary glands are adding moisture and start with the initial breakdown, which is going to be carbohydrate. You often have amylase breaking down like starches to simple sugars. Will start actually in the mouth. And then as the food is broken up into smaller pieces and you swallow, it will then travel down the esophagus. The esophagus is located right behind the trachea. Now, from the mouth, initially it goes to the pharynx, which is shared with the respiratory system, then the esophagus. From the esophagus, then the food's going to hit the stomach. From the stomach, it moves into the small intestines, which is broken down into three components. The order of which the food would travel from the stomach initially goes into the duodenum, then the jejunum, and then the ileum, which then feeds into the large intestines. In the large intestines, it is broken down into several different sections or parts. Basically, the food's going to go into the cecum. That is what is connected to the ileum of the small intestines. In that area is where you do find the appendix. And then the food's going to go up the ascending colon. So this is all part of the large intestines. To the transverse colon, down the descending colon, to the sigmoid colon, to the rectum, and finally out of the anal canal. Some people may look at it as for the digestive system, that the food's going to go between the teeth, over the tongue, and look out stomach, here it comes. When we look at microscopically, just very briefly, of the digestive system, there's four different layers of the alimentary or digestive system canal wall. The mucosa, the submucosa, muscularis externa, and then depending on where you're at, either the serosa or the adventitious layer. The arrangement is very similar, but each one's going to have specialized structures that help assist with the unique functions of that particular portion of the system. So this is a cross section that is just showing, if you start on the left hand side, you can see the mesentery, that connective tissue that is helping to hold the various organs in place and attach them to the wall of the abdominal pelvic cavities. You do have quite the extensive nerve and blood supply. You're also going to have, as you can see, the green is the lymphatic vessel. So they are passing throughout the various layers. You do have a lot of various glands associated with the entire digestive system, depending on which location you're at. And you can see those four different layers. The innermost layer being the mucosa. Then you've got the submucosa, the muscularis externa. This is composed of the muscles. Two different layers. One's going to be longitudinal, the other is circular. This is helping because the orientation of the fibers is different. It does help as they each contract to move the material along the digestive system. It's kind of like, let's keep it moving, pushing it along. And then the outermost layer, you have the serosa. The accessory structures are the tongue, the teeth, the liver, the gallbladder, salivary glands, and then the pancreas. Remember, you do have serous membranes that are lining your abdominal pelvic cavity. You have the parietal membrane that's lining the cavity itself, and then the visceral membrane covers the outer part of all the or most of the abdominal organs. There is space that is between these two serous membranes. It's filled with fluid, and that space is known as the peritoneal cavity. The mesenteries, this helps. There's several different ones, the dorsal mesenteries and the ventral mesenteries. Basically, they're providing a way for the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and the nerves to pass along between the organs so they can supply the needed either nutrients or signals to the various organs. And some of these are also helping to, like I say, attach to the body wall. So this is a cross-section showing the location of some of these mesenteries. So if we start off, the following food as it moves through the digestive system. Obviously, first it's going to come into the mouth. A few things just to point out here. The uvula, that is that piece of cartilage that if you open your mouth wide, you can see it hanging down in the back. And then the lingual frenulum, that is helping to attach the tongue to the base of the mouth. This is just another section showing the oral cavity, where you can see the tongue, which is a muscle, the location of it, and then down, remember the trachea is in front of the esophagus. You can also see some of the salivary glands here. So the food's going to go in the mouth, you chew it up, and when you go to swallow, the back of the mouth, the food is going to pass through the pharynx. If you remember from respiratory system, that pharynx is divided into 3 parts. The food is going to come into the oropharynx and then progress down through the laryngeal-pharynx area. From there, the food will go down the esophagus. The epiglottis will cover the trachea to prevent food from going down into your lungs. So the esophagus is going to connect down to the stomach. How is the food going to move? This is where we have our peristalsis, or peristaltic motion. These smooth muscles are going to contract and relax in rhythm. And that is going to move. The bolus is the food that you swallow. That's what it is. So these muscles start to relax, contract, relax, contract. And that essentially is helping to push or move that bolus down. So it moves down the esophagus. And you'll see this type of movement throughout the entire digestive system. When it hits the gastroesophageal sphincter, the pressure of the food as it hits that sphincter, it will open up, allowing it now to pass into the stomach. The stomach is divided into different regions. The fundus is the top part. The main part is the body, and the pyloric area is at the base. The pyloric sphincter is that valve that will allow, when it opens, allow the food to move from the stomach into the small intestine, specifically the duodenum area of the small intestines. You can see on this cross-section area that the way the muscles are, the muscularis externa area portion, there's 3 different layers of muscles, and you can see the fibers are moving in different directions. This really helps with the mixing and the churning of the food to allow in the stomach as much mixing as possible with the gastric juices, which are going to help break down the food. Now in the stomach, because the gastric juices are very acidic, stomach is about pH 2, which is very, very acidic. And so the amylases that were released in the saliva in the mouth, they are going to be denatured. So in the stomach, what happens here is mostly protein digestion that will occur. From the stomach, the food is going to move into the small intestines. As I said earlier, that is divided into 3 different components. First, the duodenum. From there, it moves into the jejunum, which is what you see as the majority of the small intestines. And then the ileum is the last portion. So the food's going to move through all 3 of those components. In the small intestines, if you were to look, the lumen is that open area that the food is passing through. You'll notice there's a lot of circular folds, and then you have a lot of invagination or folding in there. That's to increase surface area. And then in this picture, you can see within each one of those folds, you have the microvilli. Once again, all of this greatly increases the surface area as opposed to if it was just a smooth surface. Why do you want to increase surface area? Because it is in the small intestines where you are going to continue adding different components like pancreatic juices. You'll add the bile from the that's produced in the liver but stored in the gallbladder. The bile helps break down lipids. You in the small intestines now are breaking down lipids, you're breaking down carbohydrates, and you're breaking down proteins. And you are absorbing all of those nutrients. They get absorbed into the bloodstream. And so this is how you get those nutrients. So you want to increase the surface area so you can absorb as much as possible. From the small intestines, the food is going to go through the ileocecal valve into the cecum. From that, the food's going to be moved up the ascending colon. It's going to go around that curve that's called the right colic flexure, sometimes called the hepatic flexure. Then it moves across the transverse colon to the left colic flexure or splenic flexure. Down, it will move down the descending colon, down to the sigmoid colon, through the rectum, and finally it is expelled through the anal canal via the external anal sphincter will open, allowing the waste products out. In the large intestines, as you will learn in lecture, that is where water reabsorption is occurring and compaction of the waste. All of the nutrient absorption has mostly occurred by that point. Some of the accessory structures, this is showing a cross-section of a tooth, where you divide it into the root, which is below the surface of the gums. You should not be able to see that. Ideally, you should not be able to see the neck either. The portion you see is referred to as the crown. The enamel is the outer surface, and then you can see the root canal in the middle that has the blood supply, supplying the majority portion of the tooth itself. That root canal does contain nerve, it does contain blood vessels. If any of you have ever had a root canal done, what they do is they go in and then they either cut or destroy the nerve to that area because you've had damage to the tooth. And so they oftentimes you have pain there, so they will deaden or destroy that nerve that's in the root. This is showing the teeth. Your deciduous teeth or milk teeth, those are what commonly are referred to as your baby teeth. And then you've got your permanent teeth. As you can see, we divide them into incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Different teeth have different shapes for different functions. Once again, structure determines function. The incisors are often helpful for tearing, and then the molars are for chewing. The tongue, another one of your accessory structures here. You should have had some of this from A&P1 when discussing the special sense of taste. The taste buds are on the tongue. They are below the surface of the tongue. So you have what we call the taste buds. The receptors are actually below the surface. So in order to taste anything, it must be in liquid form. So when you chew something that's in solid form, the saliva is going to help mix it, moisten the food, make it easier to swallow. It starts the digestive process, but it's also mixing with it and dissolving it so that when it goes down into these pits by the papillae, that you can actually pick up that taste sensation. Your salivary glands, there are 3 of them. The sublingual gland, which is below the tongue. You have the submandible gland, which is also below the tongue, and the largest one is the parotid gland, which is basically in front of the ear. All 3 of these are providing the saliva, like I said, to help moisten the food, and it does start the carbohydrate digestion. This is showing the liver. The liver is divided into several different lobes. The left lobe is separate from the right lobe completely by the falciform ligament. This becomes important if you're talking about liver transplants. It's easy to separate those out. At the very bottom, tucked, you can see it kind of peeking out. It's tucked behind the liver is the gallbladder. You can see the gallbladder's orientation easier on this drawing. A lot of people mistakenly think that the gallbladder makes or produces bile. It does not. The liver does. And then the excess bile is stored in the gallbladder. If you have gallbladder surgery, they remove the gallbladder, you are still making bile, but you don't have excess stored. Bile is used to break down fats, lipids, and so you will have to watch your fat intake from that point. The bile will move down the hepatic duct and be drained into the small intestines. You can see where the pancreas, which is also important for one of the major things is insulin production. And it also has the pancreatic duct and sphincter, which will also feed into the small intestines. So that's why it's so important in the small intestines that you're able to have the continued breakdown, not only absorption, but breakdown of the